I want you to just take a second and imagine stepping onto a $400 million five-star floating hotel.
Oh, wow.
You know?
Yeah.
You're completely surrounded by stained glass, all this ornate wood paneling. Maybe you're heading down to the heated swimming pool, or perhaps you've got a game scheduled on the squash court.
Right, living the dream.
Exactly. And everyone around you, from the chief engineers who actually designed the steel beneath your feet to the international press writing about the voyage, they all promise you that absolutely nothing can go wrong. Like, it's a mathematical certainty.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly seductive promise, right?
Yeah.
That idea really represents the ultimate Gilded Age fantasy. Just this complete triumph of human engineering over the unpredictable, often violent forces of nature.
It really does. But today, we're taking a deep dive into the exact moment that promise violently shatters. We're looking at a really comprehensive historical breakdown of the RMS Titanic's doomed maiden voyage back in 1912.
A story I think we all feel like we know.
Right. And for those of you listening, our mission today isn't just to recount a tragedy. Like, we all know the ship sinks.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah, exactly. What we really want to dissect is the architecture of arrogance. We're looking at this perfect storm of corporate pressure, engineered blind spots, and just deep psychological denial that turned an unsinkable marvel into a mass casualty event.
To really understand how a failure of this magnitude happens, you have to look at the sheer scale of the system they built. Because the Titanic was, the absolute pinnacle of luxury, but it was also a massive monument to hubris.
Oh, 100%.
We were talking about a vessel that's around 269 meters long and over 53 meters high. I mean, it wasn't just a transport ship to get people across the Atlantic.
Right, it was an experience.
Exactly. It featured Turkish bath, an electric bath, a full gym, 4 different restaurants.
Wait, an electric bath?
Yeah, it was exactly what it sounds like. Plus 2 barbershops and a fully stocked library. When you adjust its construction cost for inflation, you are looking at a $400 million investment in today's money.
That is just wild.
Right, and the sheer capital involved created this aura of absolute invincibility.
And they aggressively marketed that aura. I mean, the vice president of the White Star Line Company publicly declared the ship to be completely unsinkable.
Who really did?
But the fascinating thing is that this wasn't just cynical marketing fluff to sell tickets. Like, the builders genuinely believed it. They based this unwavering confidence on 2 main structural features.
Right, so the designers relied heavily on a double-bottom hull and this system of 16 watertight compartments. Now, the crucial math here, which really became the foundational flaw of the whole expedition, was that the ship was engineered to stay afloat even if 4 of those 16 compartments completely flooded.
Okay, so 4 out of 16.
Yeah. They mathematically modeled all these different failure states, and they simply could not conceive of a realistic scenario where the ocean would breach more than 4 compartments at exactly the same time.
Okay, let's unpack this because it sounds reasonable on the surface, but it reminds me of building what a tech company might call an unhackable modern computer system.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right, like you build multiple highly sophisticated firewalls, and because the creators are so incredibly confident in the math behind those firewalls, they decide they just don't need basic secondary safety nets.
They get complacent.
Exactly. They don't install basic antivirus software, or, in the Titanic's case, they don't bother installing enough lifeboats because the ship itself is supposedly the lifeboat.
That is the exact psychological trap of unsinkable design. When engineers and executives start to believe that a system is absolutely infallible, their entire risk assessment paradigm just shifts.
It totally changes how they see danger.
Right. The safety features themselves create this massive cognitive blind spot. The mindset fundamentally changes from, how do we mitigate a disaster if it happens, to, well, a disaster is literally impossible, so preparing for it is just a waste of resources.
Wow.
It's a phenomenon called the normalization of deviance. You start accepting risky conditions as normal because your system hasn't failed yet.
And that blind faith didn't just stay in the shipyard, right? It traveled right up to the captain's bridge, which kind of explains their baffling behavior in the ice fields.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the North Atlantic in April of 1912 was practically a minefield of icebergs. On April 12th, just 2 days into the voyage, the Titanic starts receiving ice warnings from other ships via wireless radio.
Yeah, they're getting live updates.
And they do adjust their course slightly south, but they do not touch the brakes. They maintain a speed of 21.5 knots, which is about 40 kilometers per hour.
And that normalization of deviance only accelerates. By April 14th, the actual day of the collision, 7 more specific ice warnings come in over the radio. 7 distinct messages, basically saying, we are surrounded by ice and you're heading straight for it. And yet, the 62-year-old captain, Edward John Smith, and his senior officers do not significantly slow the ship down.
I really struggle to understand that, though, because Captain Smith is a 62-year-old veteran of the ocean. I mean, he has decades of experience.
He was highly respected.
Right. So why on earth would a seasoned maritime commander navigate a literal minefield of icebergs at top speed after 7 warnings? Like, why not just stop for the night?
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, in 1912, the line between nautical command and corporate capitalism was incredibly blurred. The chairman of the White Star Line, Joseph Bruce Ismay, was actually on board for the maiden voyage.
Oh, so the boss is quite literally looking over his shoulder.
Exactly. And the White Star Line's business model wasn't necessarily to be the fastest ship. Their rivals at Cunard held those records, but they wanted to prove they could cross the Atlantic on a rigorous, predictable 6-day schedule without sacrificing their extreme luxury. So there was tremendous pressure from Ismay to beat their own internal estimates and secure a massive public relations win in New York.
Wait, so they are navigating a literal minefield of icebergs? And instead of hitting the brakes, the corporate boss is pushing for a PR win?
Yeah.
That is a terrifying level of corporate pressure. I read that at one point, Captain Smith actually showed a specific ice warning to Ismay, implicitly suggesting they should be careful.
Oh, it gets worse.
And Ismay literally stuffed the warning paper into his pocket to hide it, keeping it away from the rest of the crew so they wouldn't slow down.
It's just a staggering interference in safety protocols. Corporate vanity actively overrode the physical reality of the environment.
It's mind-blowing.
The company prioritized a commercial narrative, the flawless, unstoppable maiden voyage, over the very real data coming into their radio room. The ship was set on a fatal collision course by human ego long before any lookout ever spotted the ice.
And that collision between ego and environment happens on the night of April 14th. And if you look at the physical conditions, it is basically a perfect storm of optical illusions.
It really was.
The sea is completely flat and calm. Now, you might think a calm sea is a good thing, but without waves breaking against the base of an iceberg, you don't get that whitewater warning sign.
Right, there's no visual cue.
Plus, it's a moonless night, so visibility is near zero. The temperature has plummeted below freezing, and the wind is whipping so fast, it's literally making the crow's nest lookout's eyes tear up.
Up in that freezing crow's nest is a lookout named Frederick Fleet. And at 11:39 p.m., this massive dark shadow simply materializes out of the starless horizon.
Just out of nowhere.
It's an iceberg estimated to be 200 by 400 feet, roughly the size of a football field, and towering as high as the crow's nest itself. Modern scientists estimate this piece of ice weighed around 1.5 million tons.
Wow.
So Fleet rings the warning bell 3 times and desperately calls down to the bridge, "Iceberg, right ahead."
And they only have 1 minute. 1 minute to react to a 1.5 million ton obstacle.
Yeah.
First Officer William Murdoch signals the engine room to turn the ship to the left and reverse the engines. But at 11:40 p.m., the ship's front right side, the bow, grazes the iceberg. It is not a head-on smash. It is a scraping impact that lasts for about 10 seconds.
10 agonizing seconds.
Now, you might be wondering, how does a block of ice cut through heavily riveted solid steel? Well, think about crashing your metal car into a wooden tree. The wood is technically softer, but the sheer massive weight and force cause catastrophic deformation.
That's a great way to visualize the kinetic energy involved. The iceberg doesn't need to be harder than the steel. The Titanic's forward momentum against a 1.5 million ton immovable object simply overwhelms the metallurgical strength of the hull.
It just gives way.
Furthermore, the steel manufactured in 1912 had a high sulfur content, making it particularly brittle in freezing waters. But the true tragedy of the impact wasn't just the materials, it was the geometry of the crash.
Right, because it wasn't a head-on collision.
Exactly. Ironically, if the Titanic had hit the iceberg head-on, the bow would have crumpled by perhaps 30 meters, but only the first 2 watertight compartments would have flooded.
Really?
Yeah, the ship almost certainly would have stayed afloat. But by trying to turn and dodge it, the iceberg grazed down the side of the ship. And remember that much-touted double-bottom hull?
Right, the unsinkable feature.
It was only on the bottom. The sides of the Titanic only had a single layer of steel. So the evasive maneuver completely bypassed their primary defense mechanism.
So the ice just pops open those single-layer steel plates along the side like a zipper?
It buckled the plates and popped the iron rivets. It wasn't one massive gash, but a series of small, thin slits stretching across the side of the hull. This is where the math we talked about earlier becomes a literal death sentence.
The 4 compartments.
Yes. The mathematical limit for survival was 4 flooded compartments. The lateral scrape of the iceberg breached 6.
Oh, man. Just moments after the collision, Captain Smith and the ship's chief architect, Thomas Andrews, go down into the lower decks to assess the damage. Imagine being in their shoes in that exact moment.
I can't even fathom it.
You've spent years building this marvel. You look at the water rising, you do the math in your head, and you experience a sudden, horrifying paradigm shift. The mathematical limit is broken. The pumps can't keep up. The unsinkable ship is sinking, and there is absolutely nothing you can do to stop it.
The realization must have been paralyzing. And this is where the narrative shifts from an engineering failure to a massive psychological and systemic failure.
Because of how they handled it.
Exactly. Once the top brass understands the ship is doomed, the immediate priority should be a hyper-efficient evacuation. But the psychological conditioning of the passengers and crew actively sabotages them.
Which brings us to the lifeboats. And the numbers here are just sickening. The Titanic only carried 20 lifeboats, so total maximum capacity was roughly 1,200 people. But there were around 2,200 passengers and crew aboard. There was never enough room for everyone, and it was entirely legal because the outdated Board of Trade regulations were based on the tonnage of a ship, not its actual passenger capacity.
And even with that severe shortage, they couldn't get people into the boats they actually had. This is a textbook case of normalcy bias.
Yeah.
When people are faced with a sudden catastrophic disaster, their brains often fail to process the danger. They cling to the belief that things are normal. Captain Smith orders the evacuation, prioritizing women and children, but the passengers are standing on a brightly lit, heated, incredibly stable luxury liner.
It feels safer than the ocean.
Exactly. They look out at the pitch-black, freezing ocean, and they simply don't believe the ship is a more dangerous place than a tiny wooden boat dangling 60 feet over the water.
Isn't it deeply tragic that the very marketing campaign that sold tickets, calling it unsinkable, was the exact reason passengers refused to get into the early lifeboats and save their own lives?
It is the ultimate tragic paradox. The illusion of safety actively hindered their survival efforts. We see this agonizing reality at 12:40 a.m. when the very first lifeboat is lowered.
Right.
It has a capacity of 65 people. It is lowered into the Atlantic with only 28 people on board. It's less than half full because people genuinely thought returning to their warm cabins was the safer bet.
It wasn't until the geometry of the ship visibly changed that the panic really set in, right?
Yeah.
By 1:00 a.m., the front compartments are holding so much water that the bow begins to submerge deeply, which in turn acts like a lever, forcing the massive rear propellers up out of the ocean. Suddenly, you can't deny reality anymore. The deck is tilting steeply. The lights begin to flicker.
And that is when absolute pandemonium breaks out. You have people fighting for seats in the remaining lifeboats, this horrifying realization ripping through the crowd that there mathematically is not enough room for half the people standing there.
It's terrifying.
By 2:05 a.m., the very last lifeboat is gone, leaving 1,500 people stranded on the sloping deck. And at 2:20 a.m., under the immense strain of the water weight, the ship's structure fails completely. It snaps in half and sinks.
And for those left behind, the environment was just entirely unforgiving.
Brutal.
The temperature of the water was -2 degrees Celsius. Even if you were an incredibly strong swimmer wearing a life vest, the human body cannot withstand that cold. Most of those 1,500 people died within minutes from cold shock and hypothermia. Captain Smith went down with his ship.
And
Ismay, the corporate chairman who pushed for the speed, managed to find a seat in a collapsible lifeboat and survived, forever facing public disgrace.
the sheer loss of life is staggering. But what makes studying the Titanic so maddening, even over a century later, are the what-ifs. The layers of communication failure.
Yeah, let's talk about those.
The tragedy wasn't just caused by the iceberg. It was compounded by failures from other ships and the crew's panicked mistakes. Take the heroic efforts of Titanic's senior radio operator, Jack Phillips. He spent the final hours of his life desperately sending out distress calls starting at midnight.
Right, and the RMS Carpathia detected the call at 12:20 a.m.
Exactly, and they pushed their engines to the limit to come help. But the Carpathia was 107 kilometers away. It took them 3.5 hours, arriving between 3:3 and 4 a.m., which was way too late.
Here's where it gets really interesting, but in a heartbreaking way. The Carpathia was not the closest ship.
No, it wasn't.
There was another vessel, the SS Californian, that was just 37 kilometers away. It was so close that it could actually be seen on the horizon.
An officer loading lifeboats even pointed it out to panicked passengers, promising them that help was practically next door.
I can't imagine how torturous that must have been, to physically see salvation just sitting there in the distance, unmoving.
The Californian was actually the ship that had sent the Titanic its final ice warning. But at 11:15 p.m., realizing the ice field was too dangerous, the Californian stopped for the night, and their radio operator simply switched off his machine and went to sleep.
So you have a ship so close they can see it, but because of a sleeping radio operator, hundreds of people die.
But the Titanic didn't just use radios, they were firing explosive distress rockets too.
Right.
And the crew on the Californian clearly saw those rockets. They even woke up their captain, Stanley Lord, multiple times to report them. But Captain Lord assumed the rich passengers on the Titanic were just partying and setting off celebratory fireworks.
He thought it was a party.
Yeah. He completely ignored the visible distress rockets. He never ordered his radio operator to wake up and check.
It shows how fragile communication networks really are. And it wasn't just external failures, there was internal human error, too.
Oh, definitely.
When the Iceberg was first spotted, First Officer Murdoch ordered the ship to turn. But the steersman, Robert Hitchens, panicked at the warning and mistakenly turned the wheel right towards the ice instead of left. He corrected it, but that brief confusion cost them precious seconds.
And to add one final layer of bitter irony, Captain Smith had actually scheduled passenger safety drills for the exact day of the collision, but he canceled them.
Wait, really?
Yeah, again, operating under the assumption that life-saving drills on an unsinkable ship were just a nuisance to the wealthy passengers.
Unbelievable.
When the formal inquiries took place, they heavily blamed Captain Lord of the Californian for his inaction. But looking back objectively, no single person sank the Titanic. It was a cascading failure of the entire maritime systems culture at the time.
Right, it was systemic.
The regulations were outdated. Corporate expectations pushed captains to ignore safety. The engineering community possessed immense hubris. Captain Lord was a failure point, yes, but so was Joseph Bruce Ismay hiding the ice warning, and the White Star Line prioritizing deck space over lifeboats.
Moving from the immediate tragedy to its legacy, it really did change the world forever. Because of this totally preventable disaster, we got new regulations. The global community established the International Ice Patrol in 1914 to actively monitor icebergs.
A huge step forward.
And more importantly, it led to the SOLAS Treaty, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. That treaty finally mandated that every single vessel must carry lifeboats for every single passenger, and that radio communications must be monitored 247.
It forced a complete rewrite of maritime safety standards. But physically, the ship itself faded into myth for over 70 years. It wasn't until September of 1985 that Robert Ballard finally located the wreckage.
Down in the pitch of black.
Yeah, 3.8 kilometers deep. And their discovery confirmed the horrifying eyewitness accounts. The great ship was broken into two pieces, lying 600 meters apart on the ocean floor.
And it's not going to just sit there forever. The physical decay is intense, the ocean environment is actively reclaiming it. Deep-sea currents and iron-eating bacteria, there's even a newly discovered species named Helimonus titanicae, are aggressively devouring the metal framework.
It's literally turning into rust and dissolving.
Exactly. Experts expect that it will completely disintegrate and vanish into the ocean floor by 2030.
It is a poignant ending. The physical structure will disappear, but our cultural obsession with what it represents certainly hasn't. Which brings us to a bizarre modern epilogue.
Oh, the Titanic too.
Yes. In 2012, Australian billionaire Clive Palmer planned a replica Titanic II to sail the exact same route.
Right. And it's faced massive delays, pushed well past 2022. And one of the major reasons, a lack of consumer interest.
Because it wouldn't have modern amenities.
Exactly. Because an exact replica wouldn't have TV or Wi-Fi. So we want the romanticized history, but we draw the line at giving up our Wi-Fi.
It's hilarious, but it really wraps up the historical perspective. In 1912, the Titanic was launched as an arrogant symbol of man's triumph over nature. Today, it stands as a somber reminder of our extreme vulnerability.
That is a profoundly powerful way to look at it. We set out today to dissect this tragedy, and I think we've clearly seen how a mix of corporate greed, blind faith in engineering, and a series of devastating human errors brought down the greatest ship of its time.
It really did.
The iceberg was merely the physical weapon, the root cause was the architecture of arrogance.
And that historical lesson leaves us with a final thought to mull over. The Titanic sank because people believed their own marketing over the reality of the natural world. Look around today at our AI networks, our global supply chains, our financial systems.
Yeah.
Which of our modern hyper-complex systems are we confidently calling unsinkable today? And are we actually paying attention to the ice warnings right in front of us?
A terrifying and necessary thought to leave you with. The next time someone promises you a fail-proof system, maybe take a step back and ask them exactly where they keep the lifeboats.